Before I begin, if these words mean something to you, if you've ever watched someone you love choose the quiet comfort of home and wondered why, please subscribe to this channel. There are more conversations like this one waiting for you. Conversations that take the experiences of older people seriously, that treat aging not as a problem to be solved, but as a journey to be understood. Now, let me tell you something. I am 106 years old. I have watched the world outside my window change 11 times over. I have seen horses replaced by automobiles, letters replaced by telephones, telephones replaced by devices that contain more knowledge than every library I visited in my youth combined. I have watched wars begin and end. I have watched ideologies rise and collapse. I have watched fashions, languages, values, and entire ways of living appear and disappear like seasons. And through all of it, through every seismic shift the 20th and 21st centuries had to offer, the most profound thing I have learned, the thing that took me nearly a century to fully understand, is that staying home is not giving up. It is, for many of us, the bravest, the most deliberate, and the most psychologically sophisticated choice we will ever make. And yet the world does not see it that way. The world looks at an older person who prefers their armchair to a social gathering, who declines invitations more often than they accept them, who seems happiest surrounded by familiar walls and familiar silences, and the world makes a quiet, damaging assumption. It assumes something has gone wrong. It reaches for words like withdrawn or reclusive or worse, lonely. It sends well-meaning visitors with worried eyes. It schedules outings that were never asked for. It confuses stillness with stagnation and solitude with suffering. I want to spend some time today dismantling that assumption, not with anger, but with the patience of someone who has lived long enough to know that most misunderstandings come not from cruelty, but from a failure of imagination. And so I am asking you, whoever you are, whatever age you are, wherever you are listening from, to stretch your imagination today, to consider that what looks like retreat might be arrival, that what looks like limitation might be liberation, that what looks like an ending might be, for many of us, the richest and most intentional chapter of a very long story. Think about what a home holds. Not the furniture, not the walls, not the square footage or the market value or any of the measurable things the outside world uses to assess a space. Think about the invisible architecture, the memory pressed into every corner, the grief and the laughter absorbed into the floorboards over decades, the particular angle of afternoon light that has greeted you 10,000 times and still somehow feels like a gift, the smell of a kitchen that has fed generations, the creak of a particular floorboard that you have navigated around for 40 years without thinking, the way your body simply knows. That is not a small thing. That is not sentiment or nostalgia or an unwillingness to move forward. That is the architecture of a self, and for older people, it is irreplaceable. Psychologists talk about something called environmental familiarity, and what they mean, stripped of the academic language, is that our surroundings become extensions of our identity over time. The places we inhabit long enough begin to hold us back in ways we cannot fully articulate, but can feel deeply. For older people, The home is not simply where we live. It is, in a very real sense, who we are. It is the physical manifestation of a life fully lived. When I sit in my chair by the window, the same chair I have sat in for 30 years, I am not just resting my body, I am resting inside my own history. I am surrounded by evidence that my life happened, that it mattered, that it was real. The photographs on the walls are not decorations, they are documentation, they are proof. And here is something the world rarely stops long enough to consider. Routine is not monotony. For younger people, routine can feel like a cage. It can feel like the enemy of adventure, the opposite of a life fully lived. I understand that feeling. I remember it. But when you have lived as long as I have, when you have buried friends and spouses, and in some cases even children, when you have navigated grief so deep it rearranged your understanding of everything, when you have done all of that, routine becomes something sacred. It becomes the quiet, reliable heartbeat of your days. The morning coffee made exactly the way you like it. The particular order in which you read or pray or sit with your thoughts before the household stirs. The afternoon nap taken without apology. The evening program watched in the specific chair that knows the shape of your body. These rituals are not signs of a shrinking life. They are not symptoms of disengagement or decline. They are acts of profound self-governance. They are the way an older person says, quietly and with great dignity, "I know myself. I know what nourishes me. I know what I need, and I have earned the right to give it to myself without explanation." Why do so many older people prefer the home? Let me ask you something first. Have you ever walked into a room and felt immediately that you did not belong? That the conversation was moving too fast? That the references were ones you didn't recognize? That the energy in the space required a kind of performance you simply didn't have the reserves for that day? Now imagine feeling that way more and more often as the world accelerates past you. The noise, the relentless pace, the screens demanding attention from every surface, the language shifting faster than you can learn it, the cultural landmarks disappearing and being replaced by ones you have no map for. The world outside begins to feel like a country where you once held citizenship, but whose rules have quietly changed without anyone informing you. The home becomes the one environment where you are not a stranger, where you do not have to translate yourself for anyone, where your knowledge is sufficient, your pace is appropriate, your preferences are respected, and your autonomy is complete and unquestioned. That is not a small thing. That is a profound psychological sanctuary. Autonomy. That word matters enormously, and I want to stay with it for a moment because I think it is one of the most underappreciated dimensions of what happens when older people choose home. One of the deepest psychological needs of human beings at any age, in any culture, across the entire span of human history, is the need to feel in control of our own lives, to feel that we are agents in our own story rather than objects being managed by someone else's. And as we grow older, the world has a habit of slowly, sometimes lovingly, sometimes clumsily, sometimes not lovingly at all, removing that sense of control. Doctors make decisions on our behalf. Adult children begin to worry in ways that, however tender their intentions, can feel like they are already grieving you before you are gone. Institutions impose schedules. Systems require adaptation. The infrastructure of daily life, designed for younger, faster, more digitally fluent people, becomes increasingly difficult to navigate. But inside the home, we remain the authority. We eat when we choose. We sleep when we choose. We receive visitors on our own terms, or we do not receive them at all. We are still, in every meaningful sense, the authors of our own days. And do not underestimate what that means to a person who has lived long enough to know how quickly and how completely that authorship can be taken away. The home is where the self remains sovereign. That is not a small psychological comfort. That is a fundamental human need being met. Now I want to speak directly to one of the greatest misconceptions about older people who love staying home, because it is a misconception that causes real harm, real unnecessary intervention, and real damage to the dignity of people who deserve better. People assume we are lonely. They see us through the glass of their own fears, their fear of aging, their fear of stillness, their fear of being forgotten, their fear of what it looks like to need less from the external world than they currently do, and they project that fear onto us. They cannot imagine being content in a quiet room, and so they conclude that we cannot be. They cannot imagine finding deep satisfaction in a small, familiar space, and so they decide we must be suffering inside one. But there is a vast, important, and frequently ignored difference between solitude and isolation. Isolation is being cut off from human connection against your will. It is the loneliness of someone who reaches out and finds nothing reaching back. It is the ache of wanting to be seen and finding yourself invisible. That is a genuine and serious condition that deserves attention and care. But solitude, chosen solitude, deliberate solitude, the solitude of someone who has spent a century learning what they need and is now quietly, gratefully taking it, that is something else entirely. That is not deprivation. That is nourishment. Many of us, and I include myself in this, without hesitation or apology, are not lonely in our homes. We are, at last, genuinely and profoundly at peace. If you are finding value in this conversation, if it is helping you understand someone you love, or helping you understand yourself, or simply giving language to something you have felt but never quite been able to articulate, please take a moment right now and subscribe to this channel. These are the kinds of conversations that deserve to continue and to reach more people. Your subscription is what makes that possible. There is also something generational in all of this that deserves honest and unhurried acknowledgement. My generation was not raised on constant stimulation. We were not trained to believe that busyness was a virtue or that productivity was the measure of a life well spent. We were raised on presence, on patience, on the deep, slow pleasure of doing one thing at a time and doing it fully. We sat with people and we actually listened. We finished meals without looking at anything other than the faces across the table from us. We wrote letters by hand, and we waited weeks for replies, and in that waiting, we thought about what we had said and what might come back to us. We understood, in a way I fear the modern world is losing rapidly, that stillness is not emptiness, that quiet is not nothing, that a life without constant external noise can be a life of extraordinary internal richness. So when I tell you that I am content in my home, I am not telling you that I have given up on life. I am telling you that I was shaped by a world that understood the value of stillness in ways the modern world has largely forgotten. And perhaps that is one of the quiet gifts older people can offer, not in spite of our preference for home, but because of it. A living reminder that it is possible to be deeply alive in a small, quiet space. And what about energy? Here is something that people rarely speak aloud, but that every older person understands in their bones. The world outside costs something. Now, in a way, it did not always cost. Every outing requires preparation. It requires the navigation of a body that no longer moves with the ease and the unconscious confidence it once possessed. It requires the management of pain, of fatigue, of the particular vulnerability that comes with knowing your physical resources are finite in ways they were not before. It requires the social energy of presenting yourself to a world that may see your age before it sees you, that may speak too loudly or too slowly, or with a particular brand of cheerful condescension that is more exhausting than outright rudeness, because at least rudeness does not pretend. The home preserves energy. It is not laziness. It is not withdrawal. It is the body and the mind in honest, mature conversation with each other, negotiating a life that is still rich, still curious, still engaged with beauty and meaning and connection, just quieter in geography, smaller in surface area, and vastly larger in depth. The inner life expands as the outer life contracts. That is not a tragedy. That is, if you are paying attention, one of the most remarkable transformations a human being can undergo. I have sat in this chair and read more books than most people will read in 3 lifetimes. I have had conversations with my grandchildren and great-grandchildren that I genuinely believe, will stay with them long after I am gone. Because when you have lived 106 years, you have something to offer that cannot be found in any school or any search engine or any amount of ambition. You have the long view. You have the pattern. You have the hard-won understanding that most of what people spend their youth worrying about resolves itself, and most of what truly matters is quieter and closer to home than anyone tells you when you are young. I have watched storms roll in from the same window for decades, and found every single time that I have something new to think about. I have sat with grief in this house, and I have sat with joy, and both of them have taught me things I could not have learned anywhere else. A small life from the outside, an enormous life from within. So what do I want you to take from this? What is the thing I most want you to carry with you after this conversation ends? If you have an older person in your life who prefers the home, who resists your invitations more often than they accept them, who seems happiest in their familiar chair, surrounded by their familiar things, who has made peace with a quieter and smaller daily world, please resist the urge to fix them. Resist the assumption that they are diminished, that something has gone wrong, that this preference is a problem requiring a solution. Look more carefully. Listen more patiently. Ask different questions. Not why don't you want to come out, but what does your day look like? What are you reading? What are you thinking about? What do you love about your mornings? You may be surprised by the richness of what you find, because what you are seeing when you see an older person who has chosen the quiet of home, what you may be misreading as retreat, might actually be arrival. It might be a person who has finally, after a very long journey, through all the noise and ambition and loss and love and confusion that a full human life contains, come home to themselves, not just to a building, to themselves, to the quietest, deepest, most essential version of who they are. And perhaps that is the greatest psychological truth of aging. The one I wish someone had told me when I was young enough to worry about things that did not deserve my worry. That after a lifetime of reaching outward for success, for recognition, for love, for belonging, for all the things the world tells us we must pursue in order to be worthy, many of us simply arrive at a place where the interior world is rich enough, full enough, real enough, where the space between the window and the chair contains more meaning than most people find in a year of motion. I am 106 years old. My world is small and it is magnificent. I would not trade it for anything this busy, beautiful, bewildering world outside my window has to offer. If this speech moved you, if it made you think differently about aging, about home, about solitude, about the people in your life who have chosen the quiet, please subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear it. Share it with someone who is caring for an older parent and needs permission to stop worrying. Share it with someone who is aging themselves and needs to hear that what they are feeling is not failure but wisdom. Share it with anyone who has ever confused stillness with emptiness, or solitude with sadness, or home with limitation. These conversations are too important to keep to ourselves. Thank you for listening. It has been the deepest honor of my very long life to speak with you today.